This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. So welcome to Experts at Work, the menopause from taboo to business issues. I'm very pleased to welcome Elaine and Jenny to our network here. This session's for members of all three of our networks. We're recording, as I say, just the speakers input for the YouTube channel. There'll be a link out afterwards. And yeah, as I say, welcome to Elaine and Jenny. Thank you ever so much for doing this. Elaine and Jenny are both partners at Irwin Mitchell LLP, and they'll be taking us through some definitions medically and legally of menopause and how colleagues can best be supported through it, both personally and as a business issue. So we'll be leaving 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. Please do ask questions in the chat throughout. We'll keep an eye on those. There's going to be a hard finish at 2:45 p.m. With both Elaine and Jenny have offered to stay online if people would like that, and to have a sort of a smaller conversation. I'm going to duck out at 2:45 p.m. as well, and we'll stop the record before the chat. So I'm going to share the slides now, if that's all right with you, Elaine and Jenny, and the floor is yours, and thank you again. Oh, if I can ask you all to mute, if you haven't already, I think maybe everyone has, that would be much appreciated. Bear with me a sec, let's get the slides up.
Lovely. Thanks, Richard. I'll just introduce Jenny and I. So as Richard said, Jenny and I are both partners. We specialise in employment. I lead the Birmingham team and Jenny leads the Leeds team. And I've really got Jenny here. I'm her glamorous assistant, if I dare say that about myself, because Jenny has a real subject interest in the menopause. It's something that she identified was going to be a hot topic, I'd say over a year ago, if not two. And Jenny has worked with a lot of partners that we have. So Jenny's got, I mean, she's going to be brilliant, but she's got real practical experience as well. And she doesn't just look at it from the legal standpoint, but she's worked with so many businesses and so many, you know, healthcare professionals, medical professionals, that this is really her area of expertise. So between us, what are we going to cover today? Richard, if I could just ask you to go on to the next slide. Oh, there's our QR codes. We'll share the slides with you afterwards. If you do want to reach out to us, if you need any further support, that's the way you can do it, so please do. What we're going to cover today is looking at the menopause as a starting point. Now, I know a couple of you have, from the questions that you shared with Richard before the event, and the comments that, you know, we've been having a quick chat. Some of you have got menopause policy already, which is brilliant, but we're going to not assume that everybody's that far ahead. So we're going to look at some of the basics and do a refresher. We're then going to look at, well, why is this a workplace issue? So that's the taboo to business issue. We're going to look at some of the legal issues. So if any of you need some buzzwords or some, you know, subject talking points that you can go to senior leadership and really convince them that this is something that you should get ahead of and be really proactive with, we'll help you with that. And then we're going to come back to the practical steps to what do you need to do at the end of this webinar? You know, what's the best use of your time? Because we're all busy professionals. How can you tackle it? So as Richard has said, please do put any comments in the chat. Richard's going to be keeping an eye on that on us, and Jenny and I will as well. So if we can, we'll weave them in as we're going through it. If not, we'll do a catch up at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jenny.
Oh, thanks, Elaine. Yeah, just conscious of the time, and actually that when I've done these sessions before, they can be really quite involved and generate quite a lot of great conversation about business case, why it matters. So we'll keep it going at a pace, but if you've got any questions, then please do share, because you'll get the most out of this session. I do think it's always useful to have that reminder though of what the menopause is, because to bust some myths really and just give it some useful context. So menopause, what is it? So it's the natural process that all women will go through at some point in their life, and it's the change of the reproductive hormones. So you've got your progesterone, you've got your estrogen, and it's those changing levels in those hormones which really display themselves in the multitude of symptoms that I'll come on to talk about. There's various myths to be had in terms of who this affects, and what's quite interesting, we've just done a big survey of a number of employers, over 2,000 employers, to ascertain what are they doing about this. And some of the sectors said, well, it's not relevant to us because we don't have people who are menopausal. Well, that begs a question in itself in terms of, well, how do you know? And also the age group it typically affects is that one I've got on the slide, age 45 to 55, but actually that's just an average, and some women will go into that process earlier and some will go into that later. And the symptoms that I'll go and talk about can cover people for the whole of that period. So this slide spells estrogen wrong, which winds me up all the time. It's the American spelling, but the graph shows quite nicely that you've got the period of perimenopause, as we call it in the UK, and that's the period leading up to the menopause. The menopause is when a woman hasn't had periods for 12 consecutive months, but the symptoms around that can persist all throughout perimenopause and for a number of years after menopause. So that is a long time. You know, we're talking a good 8 to 10 years for some women. And why it's difficult is in that time, your estrogen levels are really up and down. And so the symptoms are very, very varied, and some days are better than others. And estrogen effects, and this was new to me when I first started looking into it a couple of years ago. Estrogen affects so much of the body. So it affects your brain, really influential on the serotonin levels. So if your serotonin levels are affected and they dip because your estrogen levels have dipped, low mood is going to persist. And that's why I'll come on to a lot of symptoms that we see related to menopause are linked to psychological aspects of low mood, anxiety, brain fog, that kind of thing. Also affects hair, skin, bones, joints, hearts, ovaries, breast tissue. It's very comprehensive. If you go on to the next slide, please. And these are just a few of the symptoms. I've said it's not a full list. There are at least 35 medically recognised symptoms, but these are probably the more common ones. We'll come on to discuss, but you may have started having conversations in the workplace. Typically what I've seen is those conversations start with an understanding that menopause means that women are having hot flushes. But you can see from this that it's so much more. And why it caught my interest a few years ago is I was just working with a number of clients where there was just a lot of women who were struggling with more of these psychological aspects, actually. So stress, anxiety, brain fog, albeit not described as brain fog, going to the doctors, having stress and anxiety put on their medical certificates, and really just feeling overwhelmed with what's going on because there wasn't a clear workplace issue, there wasn't anything particularly in their personal life, but there was something. And it got me thinking, and then I was listening to a podcast. I thought there is something here. And then what's emerged, obviously, is there's been a lot of organisations doing a lot of work to try and publicise this. I don't know if you saw the documentary Davina McCall did last year, which was talking about a lot of this stuff. And she's doing another one, I believe, on workplace. But in any event, if you look at those symptoms, and the fact that women will be having a lot of these symptoms when going through perimenopause and menopause, and that it covers for that 10-year period. And then if I add this statistic in, that this demographic of women in this age bracket are the largest working demographic in our working population at the moment. 1 in 6 women in the workforce are going to be facing this. It has to be a workplace issue, doesn't it? Because you will have members of staff who are going through this. And if you look at you've got hot flushes, night sweats, you wake up in the night, you're not sleeping very well. So you're going to wake up in the morning, you're not going to feel your best. You're going to a meeting, you might be getting hot flushes. It affects your confidence. As your confidence dips, it might lead to heightened anxiety, but you might have heart palpitations in the morning and just be not feeling particularly great. You might find it hard to get up and out in the morning, but if you're on an early shift, you start at 6 o'clock in the morning, that's going to be particularly difficult. If your memory is just foggy and cloudy, but you're in a job where you're expected to be really high paced and on it all the time, that's going to affect confidence. And that's exactly what we see in terms of the outcome of this. So I'll just nip to the next slide, please. And these are just a few stats. And no apologies, it's 2018, 2019, actually, because it shows how things haven't changed. So the Menopause Society did a survey and found that 45% of women who were interviewed said they had a negative impact at work because of their symptoms. And nearly 50% said that if they had to take a day off, they wouldn't state the reason why. So it'd be put down as something else. So it wouldn't clearly be menopausal. CIPD are doing a lot of work to champion in this issue and really push all businesses to be thinking about it as a business issue, as are we. And their survey, that was 2019, came out with slightly higher figures. So, you know, 59% said a negative impact on work. And then you can see for yourself on the screen just what's coming out. But in terms of 2/3 said they were less able to concentrate, 58% said they experienced more stress. So that's their work is the same, but their feeling about it and how they feel able to cope is different. And what that results in is more time off work for many women. It results in, statistically, a lot of women will turn down opportunities for promotion because they just don't feel they're able to do that, or they've got a lack of confidence in relation to it. And then 1 in 10 women are reported in various surveys I've seen to leave their jobs, which takes me to the next slide, please. Now, Elaine mentioned I'm doing some work with some partners, and Newsome Health is one of them. So there's a brilliant app called Balance. And if you want the details, I can get that to you. But Balance is an app created by the Newsome Health private health clinic. Dr. Newsome is a menopause specialist. And she's devised the app Balance as an information tool for women to track symptoms, get lots of information. But they've done various surveys from Balance app users. And again, this is recent, which supports that the figures haven't particularly changed. But again, that shows that almost 1 in 10 have resigned as a result of the job, and 20% didn't go for promotion. So all of that in itself says this is something that is impacting on the workplace. So it isn't just something that we know exists, but have to just accept it's actually impacting. And the cost, I don't have figures, but it'd be so interesting to work out what the figures might be for your organisation of that number of people having time off is massive. And we all know that we're working in a market, aren't we, where recruitment is really hard. It's really important to be winning the race on capturing talent and keeping talent. And no doubt all of you have got strategic plans which include EDI as part of it. So if you think about it, if we've got women leaving and potentially they're at the peak of their career when they're at that stage, they've certainly got lots of valuable skills and experience. You don't want to be losing that. So the business case around it is not just the saving of the costs of sickness, absence, etc., but it's a real equality issue too. So if you just nip to the next slide, please, that takes me nicely onto this. Like I say, it's relevant for the reasons I've said and the demographics of the workforce. A lot of what we'll go on to discuss is it really doesn't need a high cost investment. So the businesses that are doing this well, they just make a start. And that's really important. Just make a start on doing something. It really helps if you've got some senior stakeholder support behind it. But just as you would with any other equality diversity programme, it's important that you're talking about it and trying to make some improvements. I'm going to leave Elaine to pick up on the legals of health and safety in the legal case, but the wider business benefits, what I mean there is things like you can lower your sickness absence. If you're managing people with performance and menopause symptoms have impacted on that, then you know you don't want that performance issues to persist. Well, doing some of the easy things we'll go on to discuss will help enable conversations, which will hopefully mean that you're not in that position. So next slide, please.
Sorry, bear with me a sec.
That's all right.
How's it gone for me? Let's try this one. There we go. Sorry.
That's okay. So I just wanted to, before I hand over to Elaine, just close on that really, which is it also is very relevant to wellbeing support. And no doubt over the last 2 years in particular, and before then, you all had a lot of work going into providing support for wellbeing for your employees. And this is a really good example of why that's so important. I think it's something like 80% of women will feel some psychological impact as a result of the menopausal conditions, with low mood or anxiety. And a lot of the things you will be doing in terms of wellbeing support will help. So it all interlinks. But if you follow through what I've just said, I mean, not only is it going to help you support those women so that they don't feel in that place where they don't want to go for promotion, or they feel that they've got to go off work and not talk about it. You know, you've got to do some of these things to try and overcome that, and that will lead to you having better attendance, engagement, etc. So we'll go on to talk about the legal bits, and then what we were going to do after that bit, in that round of context, because obviously legal reasons make up the business case for why we need to be doing stuff. I'd really like to have a conversation about what I've seen work really well as easy steps you can start to be taking, and then share some insight from you guys really in terms of what you're already doing. So I'll hand over to Elaine. And I know that was quite a quick wrap up, but I want to leave plenty of time for chat.
You're on mute, Elaine.
You're on mute, Elaine.
There had to be one, and it's always me. No, and I was going to say, I'm going to take a similar approach. This isn't going to be particularly detailed, because at the moment, the legal concepts that we're dealing with are those that are all already familiar to us. Yeah. So, oh, am I back?
Yeah, you are now.
Good. So they're at the moment, your health and safety obligations, there's not any specific reference to the menopause, but where it factors in is that you do have an obligation to do risk assessments, for example, for workers, and the menopause hits women at certain ages, as Jenny has said. So you should be doing the risk assessment as part of best practice. And like Jenny's just said, that doesn't have to mean a huge financial obligation or investment. Simple changes that you can identify when you're talking to an employee about how the menopause is affecting them could be something really sensible, something common sense. So for desk-based workers, it could mean giving them a fan or moving them desks to somewhere where they've got access to an open window. You know, for non-desk-based workers, you might have alternative measures. You might need to give them, or for anybody actually desk-based or not, you might need to give them access to facilities. You might need to give them more frequent breaks, etc. It's about having that individualized conversation with each person that this affects, because, as Jenny said, there's so many symptoms and it affects everybody in a different way. So the important thing is that the risk assessment actually gives you a method by which you can start to have that conversation, and it takes away some of that awkwardness because you've got a framework to work to. So that's your health and safety obligations. We then have to consider the normal procedures that we would, and the normal considerations around unfair dismissal. So some of the symptoms that Jenny's run through, you know, brain fog, the struggling to concentrate, the hot flushes, etc. You can see how that will affect somebody at work, and it might commonly come out as affecting their performance, in which case subjecting them to a performance improvement process without factoring in the effect of the menopause and how that can be managed could lead to an unfair dismissal claim. It could also be that actually it affects not their performance in their role, but their general attitude or demeanour. And it's really important to understand that this perhaps isn't a misconduct. It might actually be behaviours that are manifesting because of one of these symptoms. So this is going to affect everything across the board. You know, every process that you have in terms of ER management, sickness absence management, performance management, you know, standards of behaviour, etc. You're going to have to consider them in the context of, well, how do we factor in the menopause, and if that is a contributing factor to the situation we're trying to deal with. Likewise, discrimination complaints. So at the moment, menopause isn't specifically protected, but it can still be a discrimination issue because it affects women, so sex, of a certain age, and the symptoms can go on for years. So again, we might have disability in there. So again, it's about how do we factor understanding the condition, understanding the impact, you know, what reasonable adjustments we can make, what standards we can expect, what coping mechanisms we can help, what support that we can provide in how we interact and deal with that employee to make sure that within the existing discrimination framework, we aren't falling short of our obligations or we can't be criticised. And as I said, because this could be a disability issue, depending upon how severe severely the menopause affects each individual, it might trigger the duty to make reasonable adjustments. So even though under your health and safety obligations, as a matter of best practice, you should be thinking about the support that you can give, actually there might be an active duty on you to do that under discrimination legislation. And we've got loads of cases in the tribunal because menopause is really becoming a bigger issue. And in fact, the one that I like to mention involves the court and tribunal service, because I always think it's nice when we act for employers when you occasionally see the Ministry of Justice or the courts and tribunal service who don't get it right all the time. I think it gives us peace of mind. But that was a recent case in 2018. So one of their clerks was going through the menopause and she had medication that she had to dissolve in water. And so she had a water jug on her desk. And there was an issue where she thought a member of the public had drank from her jug. And so she reacted quite strongly to it, maybe not in the most professional way, and an argument ensued and it got really heated. And the court and tribunal service actually dismissed her, saying, one, you shouldn't have had medication on a jug on your desk that was available, and that was a breach of health and safety rules. But also the way that she dealt with the individual was unprofessional behaviour, which reflected badly on the courts and tribunal service. She brought a claim. She'd actually been employed by the courts and tribunal service up in Scotland for more than 20 years. She brought claims of unfair dismissal and discrimination on, arising from the menopause. And she won her claim and she was awarded over £19,000. And there was criticism of the courts and tribunal service as her employer to say they hadn't properly factored in that she'd had an emotional reaction because of panic, taking into account all the other symptoms that she was suffering, because she was suffering from memory loss, poor concentration, lightheadedness. And they said those symptoms affected the way that she reacted to that situation, and that should have been factored in to these allegations that she behaved unprofessionally. And that case, isn't on its own. Even only 2020, so just over a year ago, there was a decision against Von Marsh, the clothing retailer. So you would think big retailer, big employer should have a sophisticated HR function. And actually that case was because a male manager had referred to a lady who was going through the menopause as a dinosaur. So again, she brought a claim for harassment. So I think you can't take for granted that employees will not necessarily understand how to deal with it, how to have those conversations, not only in the context of your own internal HR procedures, but just generally in terms of, how we all interact. And that manager obviously thought he was making a funny comment, but that really hit a nerve and it fell within the harassment category. So that's where we are now. And at the beginning of this section, I did say at the moment we are dealing with existing considerations around discrimination and unfair dismissal. But I think that is likely to change, and it is very possible that menopausal women are going to be given specific protections soon. For those of you that are reading the HR journals, you'll have seen sort of comments that, well, we give protections to pregnancy and maternity, so should we do it at the other end of the spectrum for women who are perimenopausal or menopausal? And the Women and Equalities Commission have recently done a call for evidence. I don't know if any of you've seen it or even if you've responded to it, to say, well, actually we need to look and we need to get the data to understand the extent to which women are suffering discrimination at work because of the menopause. And once they've got that data, the next step will be to consider how government can set policy and how we can set expectations for workplace practices to make sure that they get the support and make sure that we remove that element of discrimination so far as possible. So there's a period of change that's happening at the moment, and my personal view, I don't know whether Jenny agrees with me, she'll probably say afterwards, is that I think we will potentially get menopause as a protected characteristic, and I suspect we will get the requirement for specific health and safety assessments to be done in the same way that we do for pregnant employees. So I don't think there'll be a radical change, but I think there will be specific mention and specific consideration, because it comes back to that point that Jenny was saying of this is the largest demographic of the working population, and it is growing, so it is going to become a real hot topic, even more than it is at the moment. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a kind of framework or an overview of the legal implications. What should you be doing about this, which then will lead nicely into over to you. We'll do a Q&A and a discussion. But really, I see HR's role as being, you've got to help initially just break through the silence in your organisation if you're not already. We've got to demystify it. We've got to remove that taboo so that it's something that everybody feels comfortable to discuss in the appropriate way for the appropriate reasons. So removing barriers, making sure that everybody understands, you know, bust those myths that it's only hot flushes, have an increased awareness of actually all of the symptoms, get an understanding of what the menopause is, and consideration of how that might impact and why it is a workplace issue. At the same time, however, what I'm not suggesting is that we are gung-ho about it. It's really important that we respect that this is an individual experience for everybody who goes through it. And while some people might be really open about talking about it, others might not, and they might consider it a really private issue. So we've still got to say, this is an issue about which we should all be open and be talking about it, but that doesn't mean that, you know, every individual will want to. And I think as much as we can encourage that as well, we shouldn't see ourselves as the only solution. You know, Jenny mentioned that there are apps available that we can tell people about. You know, we should be looking for occupational health support or GP support. And we should also not forget, this isn't just about the individual that's going through the menopause. This is about line managers and colleagues. They'll need support as well in how to have those conversations and you know, to do it in the right way. And I think finally, it's just really important to assume, or rather not to assume, that this is an issue that men aren't going to be interested in as well. You know, this isn't just a female issue. I remember I was speaking to a contact of mine, and she was, for a time, she's not there anymore, but she was head of HR at a big food manufacturer retailer, and she said she'd noticed on one of their production lines that there were real issues, and she pretty quickly noticed, because she was very switched on, that they had menopausal or perimenopausal age women on this one production line. So she said she just made a really big decision. She took all the line managers and supervisors who happened to be men, and she put them in a room, and she sat them down, and she started off the meeting by going, we're going to talk about the menopause. And their faces dropped, but she persevered. She explained to them that, you know, the medical background as we have, and she said she could see the penny dropping, and she came up with this.
Elaine, sorry,
but more importantly, the reason this story, one of the supervisors came over to her. One of the supervisors came over to her and actually said, I think my wife might be menopausal. And he really valued that conversation, not only because it improved production on the line, but also, you know, he had a personal interest in it. And I think that's important. This is a human issue. We are all humans. So, as I say, really conscious of time, and we wanted to give you a really good chance to have a chat. So it's over to you. We're having a menopause. So we want to know your issues and have a really good discussion, please.
Benny, of you, I mean, just to start that off, I think the starting point is exactly what we've said in terms of getting those conversations going. Has anybody got some good examples of how they've started to do that, or in fact, have you started to talk about it in the workplace? Has anybody got something to share on that front?
I'm going to dip in. I'm just going to stop the recording now so we can have a frank conversation. Bear with.